Hi, everyone. Okay. Sorry for being late. My name is Richard Yu, and I work for UMBC Student Life. And for this event, basically, I wanted to talk about the Mosaic Center and how UMBC is trying their best to promote diversity, no matter what religion you are, no matter what race you are, no matter what sexual orientation you are. Like, we're a university that tries to promote diversity as much as possible. And as a student here, being at the Mosaic Center, it's just a very open place I can go to. A place where when I'm standing in there, I know that I can say anything I want. Well, mostly anything. But I can say, basically, it's a safe zone where I know I can be okay. So, as a student at UMBC, I would like to present the this wonderful guy that I just met today. But yeah,
Thanks.
thank you.
All right. And let's give a hand for, what's his name? Okay, good evening. My name is Theo Gonzalez. I'm the chair of the Department of American Studies. We want to thank our sponsors for tonight's evening: the Mosaic Center for Culture and Diversity, the Drescher Center for the Humanities, the American Studies Department, and the Gender and Women's Studies Department. This talk is part of the Humanities Forum. I want to encourage all of you to take a look at the other events in the series, either on the flyer we have available or at the Drescher Center website, dreschercenter.umbc.edu. Okay. I'd also like to invite you to attend our last Humanities Forum event for the semester, which takes place on Tuesday, December 2nd at the Library Gallery. It's titled Mapping Memory, Digitizing Sherman's March to the Sea, and this event will feature historian Anne Rubin and visual arts professor Kelly Bell. Most of the bios about Helen Zia will point out the fact that she is a journalist, and with good reason. For several years, Helen served as executive editor of Ms. Magazine. And had she decided to remain on the East Coast and in this cold, she was poised to become its editor-in-chief. We're often taught that journalists are supposed to merely relay the facts. Helen has done a lot more than tell some of the most important stories of our times. She has also been a witness and an advocate. And I'd like to just give you two examples. Just a few years ago, Helen was actually a witness in a landmark legal case known as Perry versus Schwarzenegger. That's Arnold Schwarzenegger, in which she spoke movingly about her own marriage, about how she and her partner were one of the first same-sex couples to legally marry in the state of California, only to see that marriage invalidated by a statewide initiative. If you get a chance, I urge you all to read the transcripts from that case, especially Helen's testimony. There's a beautiful passage toward the end of her testimony where she talks about those few months when their marriage was valid and how she felt. Here's how she described it. Quote, "For a brief moment in time, we experienced a feeling of what equality was, instead of having to go to the fountain that is just for gay and lesbian people. Here we could go to the fountain that formerly said heterosexuals only, and we tasted the water that was sweeter there," unquote. I first came to know about Helen from a documentary that has become as familiar to me as the back of my hand. I screened the film to most of my classes in Asian American Studies. Who Killed Vincent Chin is the name of that documentary, and it tells the story of a young Chinese American Detroit resident who was savagely beaten in 1982. This was another landmark, the first time that the federal government used civil rights law to protect the rights of an immigrant and Asian American. In that documentary, you hear the voices of accused killers, of the lawyers and judges and witnesses, media types, and from Vincent's distraught mother. And out of that chorus of voices, you see Helen as a community organizer. She's there being interviewed alongside prosecutors. She's making concise statements to the press. She's there as well to console the grieving mother. As a college student on the West Coast, I saw Helen up there on the screen as the very model of what it meant to be an advocate. I thought to myself, if I ever get into a scrape, I'd want Helen by my side. Helen Zia has been more than a reporter for our times. She's been our conscience, our advocate, a true witness in the broadest sense of that word. She seems to play all these roles effortlessly and gives us the best example of what the humanities is about, not being satisfied to live within one discipline or the confines of one vocation. Please help me in welcoming Helen Zia to UMBC.
Well, good evening, everybody. Oh, come on, UMBC. You can do better than that. Good evening, everybody. Good evening. All right, thank you. And thank you, Theo, Professor Gonzalez, for that extremely kind and generous introduction. It's really my great honor to be here with you tonight, to be here at UMBC as part of the Drescher Humanities Forum, to speak on the far-reaching impact 50 years after the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which was one of the historic inflection points of modern times. I was very fortunate to have been around during that culmination of more than 100 years of struggle, more than a century after the Civil War was fought, which was supposed to end the enslavement of Black people from Africa by white Europeans and Americans. So this epic civil rights movement of the 1960s is remembered more today as a black-white paradigm, a black-white dynamic. But the reason it is such a hallmark of human rights achievement everywhere is precisely because the leaders of the civil rights movement and the civil rights struggle extended their hard-fought efforts to the humanity of all people. The Civil Rights Movement, the Civil Rights Act of 1964 went beyond race and included color, creed, religion, national origin, gender. And in the case of hate crimes protections, it is now extended to sexual orientation, sexual identity, and perceived disability. So it's remembered in one context, but really it's far-reaching because it reached out to all humanity. Now, I was a teenager then, and I watched the news every day about the struggles and the freedom riders, about the dogs and the fire hoses that were aimed at peaceful demonstrators. And I knew from my own life and my own hometown in New Jersey that discrimination was rampant. The Civil Rights Movement and the Civil Rights Act of 1964 had a profound impact on me as an Asian American girl, because it showed me that people, ordinary people, can fight injustice and win. And through their organizing and their righteousness, they could make positive change and move an entire country. So what happened in those times in 1964, I know for those of you here who are students, that it must seem like really ancient history. I know that. But the truth is that the Civil Rights Movement and the Civil Rights Act of 1964 are really living history. They breathe protective life to us today. They continue to evolve in ways that have great importance and meaning for every one of us here in this room. Now, some people think of those days as that they were really unique. They were just some incredible cosmic confluence that could never be replicated. But I have to tell you that today really reminds me of those times with so much turmoil and so much change going on in the world, not only abroad, but here at home. And so we know that today, 50 years after the Civil Rights Act, racial injustice is still too prevalent, and that society and the public consciousness about where we are as a society still lags far behind. We know all too well that racism and inequality didn't vanish overnight in 1964, even as we today are awaiting the aftermath of the police shooting in Ferguson, Missouri, and the discussion yet again that's going on a national level about how pervasive such injustice of what happened to Michael Brown is every day, all throughout America. So we don't know what history is finally going to be written about 2014, when history is finally written about this time. But make no mistake, this is your time. So this evening, what I want to talk about are some of the ways that we continue to draw inspiration and instruction from the civil rights law and the civil rights movement and those times, as well as some personal lessons that I learned as an Asian American feminist, lesbian activist. So first and foremost, it really must be said that the Civil Rights Act is about treating all people as full human beings in their full humanity, not as chattel, not as property, not as second-class citizens whose lives have a lesser value, not as commodities that other humans can own or mistreat. And sometimes people forget that, even today when powerful people say that it is okay to torture another human, or to ban some people from ever being married, or to take away our individual human rights and civil liberties. The Civil Rights Act instructed us not to see others in one dimension, but to see us all in our multi-hued living color with all the beauty and all the blemishes that we have in our full humanity. So I grew up in those times when these things were being discussed on a daily basis, and it really meant something to me. I really embraced them, especially being the daughter of Chinese immigrants growing up in New Jersey. Anybody else here from New Jersey? Okay, a few. Anybody has passed through New Jersey? All right, more. I'm always, it's always great to find people who are not ashamed to admit they're from New Jersey or have been there. But so for me, as a little yellow girl, growing up in New Jersey, of all places at the time, I really felt like a second-class person, not even a second-class citizen, because most people really didn't think that people who look like me could be citizens of America or even belonged in this continent. It was more like we were from Mars. And really, Asian Americans did not exist in history books, on television, and were just really not seen as part of America. In movies, we could really only be seen as the evil enemy invader that was somehow coming here intent on destroying life as we know it in America. And it was easy in those days, or easier in those days, to stereotype people who look like me, because the US Census in those days counted only about 500,000 or 600,000 Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders in all of the United States. Now, just to give you some context, the city of Baltimore has about 600,000 people. And so you could take all of the Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders from places like Hawaii, or places that with names like Chinatowns or Japantowns or Little Manila or Little India, and all of these places that were ghettos for people of Asian descent to live in those days, where we were concentrated. And spread all the people of Baltimore out and plop them in certain ghettos and the state of Hawaii. And then in places like New Jersey, we really were like one in a bazillion. So we were very invisible, and except, of course, when somebody would come speaking to me in that ching chong ah so gibberish that they would sort of think that my family spoke to each other when we were at home. And it still happens to me, even today, walking down the street, somebody might come up to me and do that, mock kung fu stance, you know what I mean? I can be walking on the street and somebody will go, ha! And I mean, what do you do to that, right? All you can do is ha! Back and let them think you're gonna do a karate chop, even if you don't really know how. But there were also the hurtful and derogatory names for just about every community that we know of, and there were the ones that I got to know very well. Chink, Jap, Nip, Zero, Kamikaze, Dothead, Flat Face, Flat Nose, Slant Eye, Slope, Gook, VC, Hindu, and so on. And there were also the gendered female names: Slit, Dragon Lady, Mama-san, China, 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 Geisha, that exotic, sexy creature whose sole purpose in the universe is to please men. Now, these are the kind of names that every community knows all too well from bullies who try to mistreat every marginalized people. But there were also the more subtle kind of things that really I think every immigrant in this country and every Asian American has heard thousands of times. It's the, where are you from? Not the friendly way like, hey, I'm from Baltimore, or are you from Columbia, or something like that. It's more, where are you from? As though you can't really be from here, right? And so, of course, what could I say? Well, I'm from New Jersey. Now, that would never fly, right? So it's like, no, where are you really from? And I'd say, no, I'm really from New Jersey, as embarrassed as I am to say that. And then it would maybe be like, your people, where are your people from? And so then I would have to say, oh, well, my people, my parents are from China. And it took me, I have to say, a long time before I realized that, hey, I could turn that question around. Because, everybody in America's people come from somewhere else unless they are Native American. And so the thing about it is when I finally would turn that question around and say, okay, and so where are your people from? Without question, 100% of the time, I have been answered, my people, oh, well, my people are from America, of course. Well, as though mine could never be. And so things like that really made me not only feel invisible, it was like I really not sure that I belong here. And even when I wanted to be part of the discussion about about civil rights that was swirling all around me in the 60s, I really couldn't even participate in that, because I remember in my high school, the way protests happened was students would walk out, have a teach-in outside in the schoolyard, and on one of those days we had a walkout, and I was standing there with two classmates of mine, Rose, who is black, and Julie, who is white, and we were standing there talking about our dreams of a society where racism and, we wouldn't have to talk about racism. And then one of my classmates turned to me and said, Helen, you've got to decide whether you're black or white. And I remember thinking, wow, okay, that is really going to be tough. And I didn't have, and in those days, I didn't have the language, I didn't have the words to say that Asian American was not a word yet. It hadn't yet been put together in those days, and I had no response to that. But it was very clear that where could somebody who wasn't black or white have a place in this conversation? Now, the thing about it is, today is a different time. Today is a very different time. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 did include Asian Americans and all people as part of, to be treated as equal human beings. And now, instead of being one in a bazillion like a Martian landing in New Jersey, there's actually 18 million Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders throughout the United States. And in fact, in the whole country, 1 in every 3 Americans is a person of color. And so soon to be, as all of you know, and as I look around, you represent. Soon there will be no majority race in America. You know that. And demographers have estimated that that day is going to come throughout the entire United States, maybe 2040. I'm guessing that it'll actually be much sooner than that. 2030, who knows? It really doesn't matter. In some states like California, that date passed 10 years ago. There is no majority race in the state of California. But the thing is that they do these surveys of people on the street and how many minorities do you think there are in this country? And people will pretty much say, well, maybe like 1 in 10. So here we are today already 1 in 3. And the average person on the street is guessing a lot less than that. So there is still a lot of work to be done. The thing to remember, though, is that as with the civil rights movement, change doesn't just happen overnight. It doesn't happen by itself. It happens with the work of many people together. And so I always remind myself of the words of Marian Wright Edelman. Does anybody know who she is? Okay, some people. Marian Wright Edelman. You should read about her. She's a noted African-American feminist. She was the first Black woman to be admitted to the bar in Mississippi. But one of the things she has said is, if you don't like the way the world is, change it. You have an obligation to change it. You just change it one step at a time. So for me, I didn't want to be this Asian American creature that I rarely saw, and when I did see it, it was really not anything that, you know, was part of my universe. And I didn't want to accept those stereotypes of being the foreign invader or the meek and passive model minority, which I will say more a little bit about later. So when I went off to college, I wanted to be part of changing the world, and that was going on all around me. So I got involved in the anti-war movement, in the women's movement, in the movements for racial equality, and one of those became the Asian American movement for youth in my community. And looking back, I've noticed that there's a little bit of nostalgia for those times. People think like, oh, how great that period was in the 60s. If only we could duplicate that again today. And one of the things I can say to you about having been through those times is that we have to learn from those movements, but we should not glorify them, and we can't idealize them. Because in fact, it wasn't as though the civil rights movement or the anti-war movement of those days or whatever was like a kumbaya, let's all get together and everything will change. Great. In fact, there were a lot of organizations, there were a lot of divisions, there was a lot of factionalizing, there were FBI spies and provocateurs, and there was racism, sexism, and homophobia, and various other isms within these movements themselves. So in those days, many activists and even leaders of those movements really didn't see how the different social justice movements were connected to each other. In fact, one movement could be fighting against racism on the one hand, but be full of sexism or homophobia on the other hand. So, you know, I think a lot of us like to think if you experience personally intolerance or prejudice on one level, that we can't possibly duplicate that against some other group in some way. But in fact, if we look at our own communities and our own families, we know that that's not true. So for example, I had what I now call my lesbian trial. And that was when I had become a community organizer. I had decided that that's what I wanted to throw myself into. And this was well before our president made it part of a career ladder to be a community organizer. But so here I was organizing within my local community, which was Black, Asian, and Puerto Rican. And I was also very involved in the women's movement. And so they were involved in separate meetings and going to all these different meetings. And so one day I was involved to a very special meeting. It's what you do when you're an organizer. You go to a lot of meetings. And this one was called by my fellow Asian American and African American community activists. And when I got to the meeting, it was in a room much smaller than this room, just sort of a corner here. And my friends were sitting in a semicircle. And they said, Helen, you sit here in the middle of the semicircle. And it slowly dawned on me that the meeting was about me. So Tariq, who was the head of the African American collective, started the conversation. And he said, Helen, we've noticed that you're spending a lot of time with lesbians. And if you are a lesbian, you would bring a lot of harm to our organizing efforts. And I was like, oh. And then the head of the Asian American collective sat nodding in agreement. And he said, yes, homosexuality is not a part of our community. It is a white, decadent thing. we could not have a lesbian working with us. So the meeting became more of a trial, and they amassed the charges and the evidence. And the fact was that I was active in the women's movement, and in our meetings there would be a few hundred women. Some of them were lesbians, but most weren't. And so they said, so Helen, tell us, are you a lesbian? Now, I couldn't believe my ears. This was my extended family. These were my fellow activists in my community, and they were threatening, in effect, to disown me. Was I a lesbian? Well, I hadn't had a girlfriend, I didn't have a membership card, I didn't get a toaster oven, nothing like that. And so I didn't know what to say, and so as they sat looking at me, saying all the terrible things that were going to happen if I said yes, I said, no, I'm not. And so with that, they were like, oh, good, great. And they went on to another topic, business as usual. Everybody was cool except for me. I stepped into the closet and I slammed the door shut. Now, the thing is about history and about movements is that they don't go barreling straight ahead, so to speak, right? They have zigzags. They go forward, they go back. They go forward, they go back. Look at the 100 years that passed between the Civil War and the Civil Rights Act of 1964, and clearly we still have so much more to go. Or the 150 years from the beginning of the women's suffrage movement, and we can still look today with so few women who are in elected office and Congress, and still no one in the White House, but maybe that will change. And so the thing about it is, if we don't learn from the past, we can be susceptible to and fall vulnerable to reactive forces that are intended to divide us. Now, what am I talking about? Well, in the heyday of the civil rights movement, there was a spirit of unity, of racial unity. And so we had slogans like black, brown, yellow, red, white, all the people must unite. And we would march and demonstrate together to show that we were fighting for a same cause. This was followed not long after by a backlash and the implementation of what we generically call wedge issues. Now, how many of you have heard about wedge issues? You know what those are? Okay, a number of you. Well, so just to give you some examples, wedge issues are not just sort of things that pop up. These are very well-researched topics that are intended as strategies to divide people. Why is that? Because, the very successful long-time tactic of divide and conquer. So today, for example, we hear constant attacks on immigrants. Right? Immigrants are the cause of all the bad things in the economy. They are the cause of all the unemployment. And if we could just keep out those immigrants, there would be more jobs for all of the real Americans. So that's the strategy of dividing and conquering. And so in my time, during the civil rights movement, there was a highly successful wedge issue about affirmative action, which initially was a very positive and noble policy that came out of the 1960s. In fact, I was one of those early affirmative action babies who, when I went to college, it was when so many of the institutions in the US of higher learning, of workplaces, were actually very segregated places, and they were so white and so male that you could go snowblind in them. Journalism was one of those institutions. And it was honorable to see yourself as desegregating those institutions. And so when I went to college, I was really one of the very few people of color, very, very few Asian Americans, and almost no women. In a very short period of time, affirmative action as a phrase went from good to bad. And if you listen to the rhetoric and news about affirmative action today, you would think that the boardrooms of America are dominated by women and people of color, when in reality, if you look at any reports, even federal reports, like if you look up the glass ceiling report, even today, 97% of senior managers of most companies are still white and male. And the fact is, even white men benefited from affirmative action because some of those policies removed rules that said to be a firefighter, you had to be so tall and you had to lift so many pounds. And when those were taken away, men of all sizes could actually become firefighters or police officers. So, wedge politics are what turned Asian Americans into the model minority. What do I mean? Prior to the Civil Rights Act, the model minority, there was no such language. There weren't any words like that. And so you know who the model minority is. They are the minority that succeeds even better than Anglos. So when I was a kid, Asian Americans were the evil invader. We were bent on destroying America. Well, then something interesting happened in 1966. There were two news articles, one in the New York Times Sunday Magazine and one in U.S. News and World and Report, that praised Asian Americans, Chinese Americans, Japanese Americans, by comparing them to African Americans. And so one of those articles begins with this sentence: at a time when Americans are awash in worry over the plight of racial minorities, still being taught in Chinatown is the old idea that people should depend on their own efforts, not on a welfare check. Now, what could be more naked than that, right? At a time when the Civil Rights Movement was happening, when the Civil Rights Act was happening, there was suddenly the emergence of a good minority that used to be a bad minority. And within that year, suddenly there was, a new way of looking at Asians in America. And so even within the Asian American community now, this has been sort of absorbed and internalized. I mean, people actually say, well, what's wrong with being a model minority? Well, what if you're, one of those Asians who are like not good at math, like I am, and or if you're from an Asian family that experiences domestic violence or child abuse or poverty, and they do exist. Well, according to the model minority stereotype, these situations just simply can't happen. And so what could be more clear? When we're all busy fighting each other, it sure makes it difficult to work together for changes that will benefit everybody. Now, the other thing to be clear about is there are some minorities, so-called minorities among ourselves who are actually saying this kind of stuff, who are trained at these highly well-funded think tanks. And they come from every race. Among Asian Americans, there's Viet Dinh, a Vietnamese American who is the author of the Patriot Act, or John Yoo, a Korean American professor who wrote the memos saying why torture is permissible under US law. There's Michelle Malkin on television, and Dinesh D'Souza, an Indian American who is one of the major arguers against affirmative action. So the thing about it is for all of us to be very alert on the ways that we can be divided, because every day there are more and more creative ways to exploit those wedge issues and to pit us against each other. So one of the other lessons I think is that to remember that movements evolve and communities grow and change as well. And so as the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King has said, the arc of history bends toward justice. The thing that makes it bend is the people. We have the power, the ability to make it bend if we organize and speak up to reach and bend that arc. And a lot of that depends on the choices that each of us have to make every day, really. For example, after my lesbian trial, I made my way to Detroit. And I went there out of being a community organizer to do labor organizing in the Midwest. Some of my friends said, well, if you really want to know about change in America, you should go to the heartland of America. So I went to Detroit. And it seemed like a good place also to be in the closet, to leave all those, thousands of lesbians that I was hanging around. And so I went to Detroit, and I got a job right away in the days that there were jobs available in Detroit. And after working in a stamping plant, how many of you have heard of Eminem, the rapper? Okay. Oh, come on, I know there are more of you than that. And you know, he made a movie called 8 Mile Road, right? Well, so in that movie, he worked on 8 Mile Road in a stamping plant. So I worked in a Chrysler stamping plant called 8 Mile Road Stamping, but his plant looked a lot nicer than mine. Anyway, I worked there for 2 years, and within those 2 years, the collapse of the American auto industry happened, and I was laid off with millions of other people. And that was a depression. That was a Great Depression that affected all of the Midwest. Millions of people were out of work, and I mean, would be online snaking the city blocks to just get an unemployment check. And so where was their anger directed? Well, after a lot of sort of media challenges to find the right wedge issue, to find the right scapegoat, it was Japan. Japan was to blame because, damn it, they made cars that got more than 5 miles a gallon, which is what they got in those days. And so they were to blame, and anybody who drove a Japanese-made car or who looked Japanese could be shot at on the freeway if you were driving your car, on the street if you unfortunately looked Japanese. So the climate was so hateful then that it was kind of like after 9/11, and anybody who, quote, looks Muslim or Arab or South American, anybody who looked Japanese could be targeted. And so one day there was big news in the paper that I read. 2 Anglo auto workers saw a young Chinese American man named Vincent Chin who was out for his all-American bachelor party. And in that climate of hate, they saw Vincent having a good time at, I have to say, a pretty sleazy kind of place. And they chased him through the streets of Detroit with a baseball bat, caught up with him, and his friend said, you know what, he's not Japanese, he's Chinese. But it didn't matter. They caught up with him. One held him down in a bear hug, and the other went after his head like they were going for a home run, hitting him 4 times in the head, and as you can imagine, he did not survive. And that was tragic enough. But when those 2 killers showed up in court in their clean-cut suits and everything, the judge took one look at them and said, you're not the kind of men who should go to jail. And they sentenced the 2 men to probation and about $2,000 in fines, less than a used car would cost. And, you know, this was in Detroit, in a city that was then about 70% African American. And to say, you are not the kind of men who should go to jail, well, what did that suggest about who should go to jail? And so there was a lot of outrage. There was no question that something needed to be done. And for me, at the time, after being unemployed, I needed to think about what was my next step. And I realized I wanted to write about these things. So I was a brand new journalist and thought, okay, this is a huge story. I should go write about this. And I went to a meeting with only a few people there. And we were there to talk about what can we do about this terrible, terrible injustice. And, you know, I was in my first journalism job, and I thought, journalists, you know, don't get involved, right? We just write about things. Well, at the meeting, the mother of Vincent Chin was sitting there, and she was sobbing. That was, you could hear her in the room crying. You know, it was the tragedy of losing her son, and then the tragedy of not seeing her son's killers go to jail. And in the room were almost all of the Asian American lawyers in Michigan, about 10 of them in the entire state in those days. And people said, what can we do? What can we do? And one by one, the lawyers said, you know what? Once a judge has rendered a sentence, there is nothing you can do unless you can get the judge to change his mind, and they will never change their minds and admit that they're wrong. So you could feel the energy going out of the room. People were like, what? There's nothing we can do? You mean we have to live with this? And for a while there was silence, except for the sound of Mrs. Chin's grief. And I sat there, the new journalist, thinking, we can't leave this place and do nothing. And so for a minute, I thought, this is the end of my brief journalism career. But I raised my hand. I didn't know anybody else in that room. I raised my hand and I said, we cannot leave and do nothing and let people think that it is okay to kill an Asian American and have the killers go scot-free. We might not be able to change the sentence, but we have to let people know that it is not okay. And then I sat down. And with that, the energy in the room shifted. And instead of talking about what we can't do, people started talking about what we can do. We could have petitions, we could organize, we could have demonstrations. And I'm telling you this example not because I want to pat myself on the back and say, hey, I did this. It really is to say, that could have been any one of us in here, in a room like that where, you know, something is being said or something is being done, and you see something and you think, well, that's not right. And you could stand up, you could raise your hand, but, you know, do I really want to leave my predictable, comfortable life and stick my neck out? But that's a choice. And there's no right or wrong. It's just that that's a choice. And that we all face those choices all the time. And so you have to decide what's right for you. But you never know what life is going to throw your way. And all through life, you're going to face choices like this. So the thing about it is, when you encounter these kind of things, it's important to connect the dots, make the connections with other communities. So for example, with the Vincent Chin case, having begun, you know, this motley crew of people who said, let's do something about this. The first thing was to, you know, let people know the community is upset. We think this is wrong. And there were people who then got in dialogue with us, who argued with us and said, you know what, the US Civil Rights Act was not designed to protect Asian Americans or immigrants, because these laws were created to protect African American people, nobody else. Well, that opened up an entire debate over, you know, who should be protected by federal civil rights law. And it was really, there was a lot of discussion about it and questions, should an immigrant be protected if they are killed in a hate crime? There were people who actually felt that the answer was no, they shouldn't. But the voice of people who were willing to bend the arc of history changed that. They said, no, actually, US law can protect other people. And so that door opened up a little bit more. The door that was opened first by the Civil Rights Act and the Civil Rights Movement. And now today, it includes you know, sexual orientation, sexual identity, people with disabilities, immigrants. And so at the same time, as we connect the dots for ourselves, we also have to do that for the people around us too. I mean, in my community, in the Asian American community, there are a lot of newer immigrants who did not live through the civil rights movement, who don't know the civil rights history and what it means for them in America. They don't know what their rights are, let alone, you know, what it means to be a person of color in America. So we have to connect those dots for them too. And it's not always going to be easy. With the Vincent Chin case, people actually said, well, if we have a civil rights trial, do we have to talk about race? Because we're the model minority, and talking about race is not what the model minority does. And they didn't say it in those words, but that's what they meant. And we had to say, yes, if we are talking about civil rights, we are talking about race. And then on the other hand, there were people who were saying, aren't you Asian Americans, by bringing up civil rights, just wanting to ride on the coattails of the African American movement? And we had to acknowledge and say, yes, there was this whole civil rights movement before us, but this is how we see the law, and that it applies to all people. And that was one of the great things about this law. And it took everything we had learned from the civil rights movement to actually bring what became a national civil rights movement of Asian Americans. And most people don't even think of Asian Americans and civil rights together. But out of this terrible hate crime came a national civil rights movement. Eventually, there was a federal civil rights trial, and that was in the Vincent Chin case. And as Professor Gonzalez said, that was the very first case in the history of America involving an Asian American, and that was thanks to the Civil Rights Act of 1964 that protected Asian Americans as well as immigrants. Now, another thing that we learned was about crossing boundaries with other communities and doing that with respect. And as a writer, I have to say one of the biggest challenges I see is how our stories are separated from each other, as though civil rights can only be about Black people, and Vincent Chin can only be about Asian people. And the women's movement only affects white women, even though every culture has women, right? And so, so I see it as part of our biggest challenge today is to bring the stories that link us together, the very real stories, the very real history that we have together, because otherwise they go what I call MIH, missing in history. And there is so much that is MIH, so many stories that are just missing from our histories. It's like today when the pundits and the commentators and the media, they say that we are in a post-race society, right? As though race doesn't matter anymore. I mean, hello. Or the debate about immigration, that the debate about immigration is separate from the debate, discussions about civil rights, when actually the Civil Rights Act happened in 1964. In 1965, a year later, came the Immigration Act of America of 1965 that is one of the reasons that this room looks like this, and that one of the reasons that America is going to soon become a majority-minority country. So what did the Immigration Act of 1965 have to do with civil rights and equality? Well, before 1965, immigration to America was controlled by quotas. Now, quotas have a bad name, but I mean, in those days, that's how immigration happened. And so people who were from Northern European countries, and not just anywhere in Europe, but Northern Europe, got extreme preferences. So for example, if you were from England, 20,000 people from England could come to America each year. 100 Chinese from anywhere in the world could come to America. And so that was Chinese, but it also applied to anybody from the darker continents of Latin America, Africa, and Asia, and as well as the Mediterranean. So in 1965, that law changed. And basically, those quotas were eliminated and immigration was equalized. And that was the beginning of the change of color season in America, and the beginning of the demographic trend that everyone here is so much a part of. So the thing is, we can't let stories like that, the real linkages, go MIH. And you know, the thing about it is that every successful movement is accomplished by bringing people from all walks of life together. And it's happened many, many times. If we can only reclaim them from where they are hidden away from us and gone missing. So for example, the feminist movement, the women's liberation movement, among the sheroes that were leading the charge of that movement for gender equality, there was Congresswoman Patsy Mink, a Japanese American from Hawaii. She marched next to Shirley Chisholm, Congresswoman Shirley Chisholm, an African American, and Congresswoman Bella Abzug, a Jewish American, and Dolores Huerta, a Latina, and so many other women and men, including some lesbians and gay men, who were working together for the humanity of all people. So more recently, I've been involved in the marriage equality movement, and one of the things to remember about that is, that also has been a direct link, descendant of the Civil Rights Act. And I have to say, I've been married 3 times, okay? to the same woman. All right. And depending on how the Supreme Court eventually goes, who knows how many more times it might have to be. But after that whole lesbian trial thing, of course, I eventually did come out. And I decided in 1992, before then, people really did kind of stay in the closet, before 1992. And so in 1992, there was another presidential campaign year. It was extremely homophobic. And there was a lot of discussion about if you can come out, you should come out. And there was a lot of the movement to out people, and especially if they were passing laws that were homophobic. And so I had an opportunity. I was invited to speak to a national convention of journalists. And it was 1992, and Colorado and several other Oregon and several other states were passing laws that almost made it illegal to be gay. And so I thought, okay, it's a national convention. I should use this opportunity to come out so that people can see that it's not all white men who are gay, which is what people thought of in the media. So I had 10 minutes. I had a 10-minute speech about stereotypes of Asians in the media. So I worked all night thinking, like, how can I get this in here? And then Leah, my now wife, said, why don't you have the introducer do it and put it in your introduction? So I thought, oh, okay, that's a great idea. So I got a Post-it and I wrote, Helen is a lesbian. And the next morning, before the convention begins, before this 10-minute speech I'm supposed to give, I go to my colleague, and I said, could you put this in the introduction? She looks at the Post-it and she goes, oh yeah, okay. And sticks it on her introduction. And so, okay, fine. So, and the conference was being held in Washington, and it was being televised by C-SPAN. So here she is, she's at the podium, I'm sitting back here, and she starts doing her presentation. Helen Zia, she's a journalist, she's a feminist, she's an activist, and she's a lesbian. And then she fusses with the mic, and she says, did you hear that? She's a lesbian. Of course, I didn't ask her if she had ever said the word lesbian in public before, and now I knew. But the goal was to make the point and have people not miss it, and nobody missed that one. So, so the thing about it is, though, now we've had this marriage equality revolution. And even with a couple weeks ago, the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals now justifying the ban on same-sex marriage for 6 states in the Midwest, and it will have to go to the Supreme Court. The thing that we have to say over and over again, and connecting the dots and linkages we have to make when we celebrate that I can be married to Leah after 22 years of being together, that this comes from movements, the civil rights movement, the women's movement, and those were the legal justification for us to be considered equal and have the right to be married. So, I mean, just imagine how differently people might view each other if history books, movies, our classrooms, our families, churches actually reflected the real history that we are part of. So I look for these MIH stories to tell. And it's really the intersection between these parallel, so-called parallel universes that if we can connect them, we can show our common humanity. And so these stories are truly inseparable from one another, and we can't let them go, MIH. None of us can know what 2014 is going to be remembered for when history is finally written, but we know that the challenges ahead, the challenges that many of you face, are great. I mean, looking at the future, we know, the global landscape is shifting. There's a reason why President Obama is making a pivot toward Asia. It is the century of Asia and the Pacific, and it really is only a matter of years, a few years, before China will be overtaking the US economy, and India is not far behind. So we know that at times of economic turbulence, the scapegoating and the attacks and the ability for people to be pitted against each other when they're afraid is very susceptible. So, and then on the domestic front, I've already mentioned the huge demographic shift that you and your families are part of. You are part of this shift to becoming a majority minority country. And sadly, we know that attacks on the civil rights of people happen all too often today. You know, after 9/11, there's the targeting, we know, of anybody who looks Muslim, whatever that is. And unfortunately, there is no group that's immune from hate crimes or targeting. We are not in a post-civil rights, post-feminist, post-human rights society. And so the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Civil Rights Movement are even more meaningful today. And in today's world, really, every one of you, with social media and new technologies, every one of you has the ability at your desktop, at your laptop, to bring about change. Even if it's sending an email or writing a blog or just, you know, putting on your Facebook or anywhere that tweeting that something happened and it's not cool, or something happened and this is great. And so today, you don't have to be defined by other people like I was when I was a Martian in New Jersey. You know, you don't have to be defined by a master narrative. Your voice and your stories can be used to define yourselves and to transform the old images. So here's a thought. You know, sometimes students ask me, does it take a big movement like the civil rights movement or a terrible hate crime like the Vincent Chin case to move people? And I have to say no, it does not. Every issue has the potential to be a catalyst for huge change. The only variable is us. We are the ones who can make an issue a big issue. And today, really, there's no lack of big issues, right? I mean, racial injustice, we're waiting to see what happens in Ferguson, Missouri. And we should be prepared to set up, you know, solidarity marches and to speak up about that, whatever race or ethnicity we are. Sexism, there's a reason why sexual assault movements and vigils are happening on campuses all over the country. LGBT rights, well, you know, these marriages are still a question mark. And, you know, the Constitution, civil liberties, how our nation conducts itself in the world. War and peace. What war should we talk about? The only difference today is what we're going to do about it. And this is your time. One thing is for sure, that ultimately it is up to you. It is up to us. It is up to the people. That's what the civil rights movement has taught us, that we have to take the power or make the power, and only then will things change. So we don't know what historians are going to write about 2014 when history is finally written about this time. But whatever happens, this is your time. And so as you go through your journeys here in college and in life, remember that you are the ones who are going to be shaping the America and the world of tomorrow with the conscience and voice that you raise today. So don't be afraid to stand up, to raise your hand sometime, to raise your voices, to yell, and to stir things up. Because remember, this is your time to bend the arc of history toward justice. And don't let this time go MIH. So my thanks to all of you for your very kind attention tonight, and I hope you raise a lot of hell. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, it's on. Okay. Thank you so much, Helen. That was just a joy and a treat, and rock on. Okay.
Thank you.
So I would like to introduce our Q&A period. My name is Lisa Gray. I am the Assistant Director of Student Life for Cultural and Spiritual Diversity with Student Life's Mosaic and Interfaith Centers. And so I'd like to invite Mariam up, who will be assisting us with the Q&A and helping us identify questions. So the floor is open to any of you who have a question or comment, and then we will be moving, I believe, to our brief reception shortly thereafter. So, Miriam?
I hope you don't mind if I take the first question.
Sure, please.
I wanted to know a little bit about your time with Ms. Magazine. What was your favorite piece that maybe came across your desk or that you wrote yourself?
Oh, my time at Ms. Magazine. I have to say that was the best, most favorite place you could possibly ever imagine working at. I mean, every day, everything we did was all based on trying to capture what people in the world were doing, what women and girls especially were doing to fight for gender equality. And so there's so many favorite things, but I have to say one of the most challenging articles that I did while I was there was about women who join white supremacist and neo-Nazi and skinhead groups. And you can imagine, yeah, it was, this is pre-internet, okay? So, you know, today you should go to some other computer and put in, you know, white supremacists or whatever, and you will find like the most vile, horrible things. And the reason I say don't use your own computer is because they're very sophisticated and they will track you and send you stuff that you won't want to get. In those days, it was by phone, and I would find these phone messages where you would reach a group it was called a hate line, and you'd pick up dial the number, and the most incredible message that you could feel the venom coming out of the telephone happening, and having to go find people to interview, and I didn't, as a journalist, I didn't hide who I was. You know, I just say I'm Helen Zia. I didn't say I was with Ms. Magazine. I just said I'm a journalist doing this thing, and nobody ever asked me, well, you know, what color or race are you? The only thing they once asked me was, are you a Jew? And because they are also very anti-Semitic and pretty much lump everybody together. And if you ever read some of their literature, it's pretty horrifying what they would plan on doing. But the reason we did it was a lot of these hate groups, in order to attract young men, started recruiting young women. And you know, this idea that, well, if you were aware of sexism, and, you know, why would you then want to just go wholesale into racism? And I mean, you know, as I said in my talk, just because there's this one prejudice you might experience doesn't necessarily translate into seeing, you know, the common oppression and the common, you know, goals that could be done. So that was one. As a woman of color, I'll say at Ms., it was, there were times, I mean, we debated everything, okay? So everything, we would have meetings, story meetings, you know, you only have a certain number of pages to have a certain number of stories. And we had one issue that was going to come out on Mother's Day. So the theme then was we did an article about feminist mothers and their feminist daughters. And I saw my role at the magazine partly to make sure we had diverse voices, that we got quotes and pictures and stories of women from all over. And we had just wonderful combinations of women from different walks of life, from different communities of mothers and daughters. And there was this one really gorgeous picture of an Indian American woman and her daughter. And there they were, and one of my colleagues at Ms. said, well, if we have this picture on the cover of these Indian, you know, Asian American women, is there a chance we could alienate our core readers? And so a lot of times, you know, you have to translate. Things don't come out directly, they're very subtle. And that was our core readers. Well, what was that point? Will we alienate, you know, our white readers if we have these women of color on the cover? And so that was a discussion, you know, as you might imagine, and they did end up on the cover, I have to say. But But the whole thing about raising your hand and being the voice in the room, you have to be in the room and you have to raise your voice, because it would have been very easy just to say nothing. And every one of us has that, that ability to just say, hey, wait a minute. And so even at Ms., or not even at Ms., everywhere those things come up. But, it was a great place, a wonderful place. And had I not met Leah, I'd probably still be there. So. Other questions?
Amazed to get here. Hi, my name is Eugen. I'm a senior here. Thank you for coming. I was just wondering, in your opinion, what are some of the biggest challenges and barriers to shifting these attitudes with all the isms that are out there? I mean, what would you say is one of the biggest barriers to kind of getting into progress with that?
Part of it is the divisions, and that the isms put us into different camps. And so I find it very frustrating as an activist that wants to see people come together, that especially as we become a more diverse society, and by that I mean even among Asian Americans, now there are, I think some 78 different languages that are spoken, and if something happens involving the Korean American community, there's a question, should the Chinese Americans get involved? And, in the Vincent Chin case, there was no question. We had to. There were so few of us. Everybody had to, everybody we could find to help support us. And so today, partly because, there are classes on these things, and so people get funneled into different categories. And some of it has to do with the divide and conquer and using racism, sexism, and the different isms. And this may seem really simple, but it's just really to break out and get to know people beyond your, sphere of whatever that might be. And I'll give you an example. When I was at Ms., there was a situation that happened where this Pulitzer Prize-winning columnist named Jimmy Breslin, and I'm sure many of you don't know who Jimmy Breslin is, but he was very, very famous at the time in New York City. And he was famous for speaking up for the common man, but it was the common man. And he would write about his wife in the most demeaning ways, and his wife ran for office and became an elected official, and he would say, I hate that my wife is now a city council person because she's not home to match my socks in the morning and to iron my pants, and things like that were ridiculous. And so one day in the newsroom, email had just begun, and a young journalist, Korean-American journalist, wrote him an email saying, I think your columns are sexist. He stormed out of his private little office into the big newsroom where everybody was together. And pardon my language, he said things like, who is that little yellow bitch? What is this slant-eyed cunt running in the, doing here, sending these things? I mean, he says this, right? And these are sexist obscenities, racist obscenities, and in any other office, you'd get fired for this. They're just not acceptable language. So he says all of this, and it's in front of about 50 reporters, so all of it is like accurately written down, and recorded. And then there was a big effort to, and so I was in New York, and I was part of a Asian American Journalists Association at the time, and we got the different journalists of color groups together to have a joint press conference. And why were we able to do that? Because we had reached out and had meetings, and so people knew who to call. Oh, it was also a Friday afternoon, so you had to be able to reach people on a weekend. I worked at Ms. We didn't have the phone numbers of people we could call of the women journalists who, after all, he was attacking a young woman journalist for standing up against sexism, and then she herself became the subject of this, racist, sexist rant. And And it was as simple and basic as not knowing how to contact each other when we needed to do that. And so I'm not saying you have to, like, you know, this whole idea of kumbaya and we have to all, like, suddenly become best friends and stuff, but we ought to be able to speak to each other and know each other and break through, you know, the things that are created there as barriers for us that come from racism, sexism, classism, homophobia, and all of the isms. So I think, you know, that's something that we all can do. And you're really at the best time to do this. You know, college is the place for you to be able to reach out and meet other people. And that might be to go to an event that you normally wouldn't go to. You know, check out what this club is doing and just show up and say hello and meet a few people. And, you know, because once you go out into the work world and the, you know, into the really segregated society, it becomes harder. So this is the time to do it, and I hope you all do. More questions?
Hello.
Hi.
My name is Richard Yu, and one thing I really wanted to ask you is, as a lesbian and as an Asian American, how did you come out to your family with the Asian culture of being, oh, in the future I have to be married and I have to be a housewife, or with these expectations?
So how did I come out to my family? Well, you know, I had my first family, my community, tell me I was going to be expelled. So I was a little bit nervous about that, you know. And so I went to the first most sympathetic people, my sister, who was very close to me. And I said, you know, I came out to her and she said, oh, I know. You know? And then she helped me. She told my mother, and my mother told her, oh, I know. and so, and I don't really know that anybody really knew anything. Maybe they suspected, but they all made it very easy. And then, you know, she told my brothers. I have 4 brothers, or she sort of smoothed the way for me. And I told them, and they were all like, oh, yeah, that's great. And so when they met Leah, it was like, welcome to the family. And that was terrific. I have to say it was, I would say, a little easier, you know, and they always say it gets better, or whatever that, you know, campaign is. Because by that time, I was involved with somebody that I knew was going to be she was my soulmate, and that if we had been able to get married, then we would have. It's one thing, and when Leah introduced me to her family, her father said, and I mean, I heard he said, so how long are you going to be with this one? You know, and so, you know, it was gratifying for him to see that we were together, you know, we've been together for a long time. I think when one is not as settled and probably more in the dating time and stuff like that, you know, parents don't even want to know really about that for, you know, straight children, let alone, you know, gay or lesbian children. So, so for that, I have to say I was very lucky. And I think it is helpful for kids of Asian parents to know that there are Asian PFLAGs too, parents and friends of lesbian and gay. So there are Asian PFLAGs. And so, I mean, because the biggest fear that a lot of parents have is, you know, they love you, and hopefully they're not going to disown you, but what do they say to the aunties and the uncles and the, you know, the neighbors and all of this stuff who are always asking, oh, does so-and-so have a boyfriend? So, you know, a girlfriend, I can match. You know, when I was in the Vincent Chin case, I wasn't out yet, and they were always trying to match me with somebody, and I'm like, oh no, you know. But so, you know, that's the hardest thing, or one of the hard things for the parents too. It's like, what do we tell people? And so if they can meet peers, you know, other parents and other people in community, you know, that they can relate to, they can see that they're not the only ones, and, you know, and get a better understanding. So there are resources out there and organizations, but that's how I did it, and I know I was very lucky. Any more? These are great questions.
Hi, my name is Chris. I was wondering, like, what you think about if one's Asian identity can conflict with like Asian American activism.
So, what if Asian identity conflicts with activism? Would you care to say a little bit more of that? I'm not sure how they conflict.
Like, say you were born in like China, for instance, and you've lived there for most of your adult life. Do you think you could come over to the States and have like a very healthy Asian American activism without being pushed out by that community?
So each community has its own positives and things that are barriers too. I have to say, having come out of an Asian American community, and Chinese American, which I don't think is all, at least at that time, not so removed from culture in China, where people really felt like, don't be the nail that sticks out, you'll get hammered down. Don't make waves. All of those messages, and especially newer immigrants today, coming from countries where if you do that, you could get killed or put in prison. I mean, that's a very real thing. So of course, parents, or families or communities are not sure whether they want their kids to do that. And that's where I really do think it's important for, Asian Americans. 2/3 of all Asian Americans are immigrants today. And so that means that they weren't born in the States. Most of them don't. Most of the immigrant generation does not have a history of knowing about civil rights, knowing about their rights to vote, knowing about being able to speak up and to organize, to run for office, all of these things they can do, but have no history with. And so part of it, and this is true for not just for Asian, immigrant communities, but really every immigrant community, pretty much. And so I see it as a special responsibility for those of us who have the luxury of being able to speak up. Like, I can come out. Not everybody has that luxury. It's a privilege for me to do that. And so it's also a responsibility for me to talk about. And for those in your, circles and in your community that have the ability to set another example, and to have the privilege of being able to stand up and show what that means, then that is our responsibility to do that. And if let's say you are inclined to become an activist and your parents are more the old traditional school of thinking that you're going to be sent away to, northeast China to dig coal for the rest of your life if you should ever speak up, there are actually books and movies and things like that you can leave around the house or make your parents watch and show them that actually there is a different tradition here and their lives could be better if, when people do that. I mean, the Vincent Chin case was a real wake-up call to people that, hey, if we don't speak up, people, our own children could get killed and their killers could, go around the street and walk scot-free. And so a lot of people who never would have demonstrated before in their lives started coming out to demonstrations. Waiters, cooks, people who worked in laundries, people who were PhDs in laboratories started coming out together saying, we got to speak up about this. And so because our lives are really not good if we don't. And that's something that can be shown. So those things do exist out there. Yes, sure.
And thank you for all the people that asked the questions.
There's one more up here.
Okay.
I just have one quick question. How was that issue resolved?
The Vincent Chin case?
Was the Justice Department involved?
So with the Vincent Chin case, and I didn't go into it because the case itself does not have a happy ending. So we did push to have a civil rights investigation. We got one. The federal Department of Justice brought suit and the two men went to trial. They first went to trial in Detroit, and the jury found the killer who wielded the bat guilty, and he was sentenced to 20 years in prison. However, there were errors in the course of the trial, and one of them was too much pretrial publicity. Now, this was in the days before the O.J. Simpson case and before computers and social media. So the whole idea of what is too much pretrial publicity was much, a harder bar to cross. And so that was one reason they ordered a retrial. And so they tried again. The one who was acquitted couldn't be tried again. So that the one who smashed into Vincent's head with a baseball bat a new trial was ordered in Cincinnati, Ohio. And between Detroit and Cincinnati is a huge difference. Cincinnati is really more of a southern state. It's like being in a southern state. And I was there in the courtroom when they did how many of you ever served on a jury or been called? Oh, quite a few of you. Okay, well, you have to answer a lot of questions if you haven't. They call it voir dire. It's the opportunity for the lawyers to see. And so they had this thick, thing to screen about 300 potential jurors. And one of the questions they asked was, have you ever known or met or had any dealings with an Oriental? So out of 300 people, about 19, I was there, I counted, 19 people raised their hands. So you have to think, 19 people out of 300 people had ever gotten any Chinese takeout, had ever done anything where they encountered another. So part of this thing, of breaking down barriers and people's minds is that they have to know somebody. That's one of the things about why it's so important to come out, because people think, gay and lesbian demons. And well, then they know that cousin Margaret is one. And if these people, these potential jurors, had never even met a single Asian person, they couldn't humanize Vincent Chin. So you can bet that none of those 19 got selected, because then the judge made all the 19 stand up as though they had done something wrong. And each one of them had to explain how they knew somebody who was Oriental and what their experience was. And so each one of them, it's embarrassing. You stand before all these, hundreds of strangers and say, well, there's some people that I knew, they lived down the street, and that, what was your interaction with them like? And well, it was okay, okay, you're dismissed. So it was a jury of nobody who had any familiarity with Asian Americans or Asian people in any way. And the jury foreperson was an older white gentleman who had been laid off from his factory job. So he was a man who was very much like the accused killer. And so the killer was acquitted. And then that was it. And so the legal case, I know Trayvon Martin's family is, I think, still debating whether to or how to pursue a federal civil rights case. And personally, I think they must. It must be done, but it's painful. It's not, there's no certainty out of it, and it's a long haul. It means reliving the case over and over again for the family. And Mrs. Chin, Vincent's mother, every time she had to speak to the media, it was like her heart broke every time. But she did it because she wanted to find justice. And when it didn't happen, she left. She couldn't be in Detroit and in America anymore. She went back to China, and she hadn't lived in China for more than 50 years, but she just couldn't stand it and be here. The good that came out of the case, and that's the thing we have to also remember, is that, out of the tragedies, out of the many, terrible tragedies that had to, lead to a civil rights movement, that there was a movement and there was change. And out of the Vincent Chin case came, at the time there wasn't any national organization at all that could, speak up on behalf of Asian Americans. Now there are, and there are lots of other regional ones. If anything were to happen, here in Baltimore, there are many in Baltimore County, there are many places that people could go to, and and so that was a step forward, and the community learned from that, and unfortunate, if it ever happens again, and unfortunately we know that there will be, other cases that that we've learned from that, and we all learn from that. It's part of our collective, knowledge. So something positive did come out of it. But thank you for asking.
Yes, on that note, I have to bring our Q&A period to a close. Helen Zia will be with us for a brief reception. So if you have other questions, feel free to come up and ask them. And at that time, I realize that I'm standing between some food and you, so I'm going to be as brief as I possibly can. But I would like to close us out officially by thanking, on behalf of Student Lives Mosaic Center, myself, Zach Kaczynski, our grad coordinator for LGBTQ programs, as well as Jasmine Malhotra, our grad coordinator for cultural programs, who couldn't be here tonight, for thanking or for allowing us to actually help to bring Helen Zia here. And we would also like to thank Richard Yu, who did our welcome. Thank you, Richard. Yes, please. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. And then also would like to thank Miriam Jallo Jamboria, who did our Q&A assistance. So thank you, Miriam. I'd like to thank our partners, the Drescher Center for the Humanities. We wouldn't be able to do this without you. Thank you so much for helping us to get Helen here. American Studies, as well as Gender and Women's Studies, great partners for this event. I would just like to take a moment to mention some upcoming events on behalf of Student Life's Mosaic Center that you may want to know about. November, as you know or may know, is Native American Heritage Month. There's a calendar of events that we have on our MyUMBC group page. Feel free to sign up to become a member of our MyUMBC group page, as well as our Facebook page. The Transgender Day of Remembrance, that Spectrum Sofa dinner that we are doing tomorrow. Yes, in the Mosaic Center, Zach. And then there's also immediately followed from that event will be our Student Speak Out panel. There's an international movie discussion series we do every Tuesday night, 7 p.m. in the Mosaic Center. And then we also have our final What's the Tea? Social justice discussion drop-in series. That topic will be holiday traditions, and that will be on a Wednesday, December 3rd. 12 to 1 p.m. Please come for any and all of those things. And then last but not least, we're really excited to be a partner with the Women's Center for Critical Social Justice. That week is going to be happening February 16th through the 20th, and our keynote speaker will be Francesca Ramsey. She's fabulous. Please come. And then also support all of the other great events that our wonderful partners are sponsoring. So to that end, please manja and enjoy. Thank you for being here. And then lastly, of course, please forgive me. Thank you, Helen, for being here. You're the reason.
Thank you.
You're the reason why we're all here, and I just thank you so much for
thank
helping
you.
us to honor the intersectional mission and vision of our center, and also of the Drescher Center for Humanities. And rock on with your work. You are,
And you too.
yeah, thank you so much. We appreciate it. So,
thank
have a
you.
good night, everyone.